So today we're going to have comments, we're going to have TEA updates, and then we have public comments. And just a reminder for the public, you have to register either here with me or via the chat in the Zoom platform by 9:30, should you wish to provide public comments. After public comments, we are going to work on our legislative updates and work on our report. Then we will review and approve the meeting minutes. We'll take possible action on our current minutes and set our future meeting topics. We'll set our future meeting dates and then we'll adjourn. Does anyone have any questions about the agenda today?
Amy, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Kristen with TEA. I just put in the chat. It looked like that that agenda might have been the previous meeting's agenda. So I just wanted to confirm today is me giving some updates and then public comments per usual. And then you're going to give some legislative updates and then kind of a recap of your report, correct?
Right. And
Okay.
we're going to maybe split into subcommittees for the new reports.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Kristen, are you ready to give your TEA update?
Yes, I am. And first, I want to, of course, introduce myself, Kristen McGuire with TEA. And then also just wanted a chance, many of you have met Laura in different venues, but Laura Briones is our Special Populations Policy Director in our Office of Special Populations and Student Supports. And so Stephanie Koch is still here at TEA, but Laura is going to kind of take over spearheading this committee. So just wanted to plug that and just so you see a new face that she'll be kind of running this meeting. So appreciate Laura for jumping in and doing that. And for me, I know that Amy is going to give you guys a legislative update here in a bit. So I don't have a deck prepared, but I just wanted to talk through. I figured I would talk through a few. Obviously, we had a very busy legislative session and many bills to now implement. So I will just go through a few that maybe are kind of indirectly related to students with disabilities, and then I can help fill in any gaps if Amy would like me to after her update. But I did just want to preface, of course, that this Sunday, the 22nd, is the deadline for the governor to either veto, sign bills, or let them go through without his signature. And so some bills he has already signed and they are effective. And some bills we have yet to have a signature. So they may just go through, starting this Monday after his deadline. So House Bill 2 is obviously a very, very large piece of public school legislation. So there are 7 articles within that bill. Article 4 is specifically around special education. And so I know Amy will probably spend some time on that one. So again, I'll just kind of be here as a resource to discuss any of that. But There are some teacher raises in there in terms of what the state is giving to school districts to assist with educator raises, as well as what they call a support staff allotment, which is essentially anyone else who is not a district or campus administrator. And so there's some funding associated with that. There's also a big state commitment in terms of educator preparation, or will be. So there are some kind of streamlined processes of educator preparation, and then kind of a state commitment to offer funding for certain educator preparation pathways. And so that will definitely be one to to watch as it moves forward into implementation. One thing that's obviously will be very of interest to you guys is that also in House Bill 2, they did add a provision that candidates who are taking for their first attempt for either a bilingual or special education certification exam, those fees will now be waived. So, basically the agency will pay the vendor for the price of those exams. So, teachers or candidates that want to become certified in bilingual or special ed, starting in the 25-26 school year, those fees will be waived. There are quite extensive changes around some early education statutes, and so they're currently in statute are sort of what we call early reading instruments, or sort of diagnostic reading instruments. In Chapter 28 of the Education Code, these were intended to just identify students who might who have some reading difficulties, and then to prompt districts to kind of gather more data to see, is this just someone who, a child who needs some intervention, or a child who might have a disability. Those will still be in place, but there are some changes. First, we're going up to grade 3 on these instruments. Also some changes in kind of what they will sort of cover. We're also adding numeracy into that. So basically we're measuring foundational literacy and numeracy skills in kindergarten through grade 3. So there will be some work to do on the agency side, of course, to create a list of approved instruments to be used for that purpose. There was also provisions within that section of House Bill 2 to now require academic intervention for reading when a student has sort of met this at-risk category or at-risk criteria in 2 consecutive attempts at the reading instruments. So these are, primarily, with some exception, given beginning, middle, and end of year. And so there will be some state requirements around what districts have to do with intervention. There is also some funding associated with helping out with the intervention requirements, as well as offering parents some funds to help with outside tutoring as well. So lots to unpack in there. There were quite a few CTE, so career and technical education changes, some adding some more emphasis on military readiness, and also some kind of enhancements to our sort of CTE pathways in your rural areas, as well as in applied sciences and other types of CTE pathways. So hopefully a lot more supports in relation to college, career, and military readiness. So we are all, of course, in the process at the agency of trying to get aligned within our implementation strategies on all of the bills. Some school finance changes, of course, and then that will be, significant as far as special education is concerned, as we get into the 26-27 school year, especially because that is changing the funding system for how the state funds special education into a service intensity model. And so that will be effective in 26-27. There were quite a few changes in Chapter 37 associated with student discipline. House Bill 6 is kind of the larger bill that is associated with discipline. There are also some provisions in HB 2 around discipline. This is some changes in HB 6 are somewhat kind of expanding teacher authority to remove students from their classroom if they are disruptive. So we will be agency-wide, of course, as well as in our Office of Special Populations, providing technical assistance around the implementation of those of HB 6 and the other provisions in HB 2 around student discipline. We have also SB 2. So we have HB 2, which is the larger public education bill, and SB 2 is around education savings accounts. So education savings accounts will go into effect in 26-27. And that will be a program administered by the Texas Comptroller. Obviously, the agency has a role in that process, primarily in terms of, just making sure that students who are applying for the ESAs, there's got to be some data exchange between the comptroller and the TEA to make sure that these students are eligible to apply. Another large piece of that is in relation to students with disabilities. So students with disabilities who apply to access the Education Savings Account program, they will be entitled to the same amount of state special education funding that they were entitled to if they were in prior public school, or that they would be entitled to if they had not yet attended public school. So this is going to be, just a heavy kind of technical assistance area on our side for districts in terms of when they get requests from parents who have children attending private schools for evaluations to determine if a student is eligible for special education. And if so, what does their individualized education program look like for purposes of funding the ESA? So that is, definitely a direct tie-in to, to your area as we set up state policy for that. And, just so you are aware of that. Also, Senate Bill 569 is around virtual and hybrid learning. So, that one is another one I expect to come back to you with in terms of just sort of information on implementation. So this is allowing school districts to, to create and implement virtual and hybrid courses, as well as potentially full-time hybrid or virtual campuses. And so that is something that, obviously will require quite a bit of, rulemaking and state policy around it, especially around how to take attendance and all of that. And so obviously in our area, we'll be primarily, concerned in giving technical assistance around ensuring that students with disabilities, needs and IEPs and, potentially Section 504 plans are met in those types of environments or can be met. One thing also I would say to be aware of is House Bill 1481. So 1481 is a bill that that requires districts to adopt policy around prohibiting the use of personal communication devices by students during the school day. So that is a requirement, that is a policy that is implemented, to prohibit the use. Now, there is an exception in that bill that, that the policies will need to provide exceptions for students who may need to use them in accordance with their IEPs or their 504 plans, or even just in relation to health and safety protocols or individualized health plans, for example. And so, that is something to keep your eye on in terms of, especially those of you who, still have children or are working with parents that have children in schools. If there are needs for personal communication devices, especially around health, that schools will need to work out how to make sure that exception is applied. There's so much, so it's kind of hard I don't want to dominate time, but there are a few others. Of course, there is a bill that will require us to take more data on chronic absenteeism and gives a definition for what that is, as well as students who are kind of defined as truant. And so there will be more data collection around that. On school districts' end, of course, and then on our end to sort of publish that data. So that I know that is something that came up this session in terms of, not really the lawmakers wanting more data on how, what is the landscape of that, and how do we help assist students who are chronically absent. So I will stop there. Again, I know that Amy is giving a legislative update, and I'm staying on just to help if I can. And if anyone has any questions for me before we go to our next topic, I'm happy to take them.
Kristen, I have a question.
Sure.
Is TEA giving any guidance on what to do about the personal communication exceptions? And how do we as CAC and or the public give our voices to that process?
On the personal communication devices, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So the agency has to develop a model policy, or at least policy text around this topic. And it does have in the bill a quick turnaround on, it does require school boards to adopt a policy no later than 90 days after the effective date. So I've been watching that one intently to see if the governor signs that one, or if that one just becomes effective, this coming Monday after the deadline. So, so short answer, yes. I think, there will be agency guidance around that. I think probably in addition to the overall agency guidance that, that is something where our office and, special pops can, definitely provide additional guidance around that. I think it's one of those that's going to be sort of a hard, since it's so quick and required so quickly, it may be one of those that is sort of guidance is initially given, and then we build on that as we move forward. And when you said that, I don't know why I blanked on even mentioning this one. Well, it's probably in your legislative update, but also I wanted to mention a couple of more in terms of students with disabilities around Senate Bill 57, which is so last session, you might recall, there was a bill that required the agency to develop guidelines around the sort of existing statutory requirement for districts to ensure that staff and students with impairments or disabilities are safe during emergencies or disasters. And so Senate Bill 57 kind of builds on that to say, um, partly through rulemaking now, is that we also address kind of individual, what does it look like in terms of individual accommodations that are necessary
Yes,
for school
I just,
drills, for school drills and in emergencies. And so, that is something, of course, then that um, we'll regroup with, stakeholders to make sure, um, that we've got the right, kind of language and angle on there, and then that those will be required for districts to implement into their emergency operations plans. It's primarily
thinking
transparency. Go ahead, Amy. I'm sorry.
thinking out loud, it may be prudent for us to add to our digital literacy and accessibility section something around assistive technology and emergencies and the personal devices sort of
Mhm.
conversation. We might want to think about that when we get to the subcommittee discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, or even just a future meeting topic too. So
yeah,
yeah, I think that's definitely something to
yeah,
consider for sure.
Yeah, we already have
Uh,
one like that, and Amy, we can kind of round that out a little bit or split it off as
yeah.
its own thing.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing I was going to mention is there. So Texas is a bit unique in the fact that we have this committee, the Continuing Advisory Committee, which is tied to both a state law requirement as well as a federal requirement. So Amy was reading off earlier sort of the federal requirements of what an advisory council under IDEA, under this, for TEA, what their duties are. And then we also have a state law that requires that report that she was mentioning. And so there were some changes to that section of the law, of our state law. And those changes were primarily to, I believe, better align with the federal law. So there are some required members under the federal regulations for this advisory council that we don't currently have within the current membership structure. So so that'll be a conversation, of course, the agency will have with the governor's office to just make sure we're moving forward with trying to get the accurate membership and the roles and categories of those on the committee. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention, is that there will just be likely some membership role kind of additions, and we'll talk to the governor's office about how they want to establish that. And then I will say, again, maybe within your future meeting topics discussion, it's probably a good idea to review this committee's bylaws. They haven't been reviewed in quite a bit, and so that might be something to consider for a future meeting. So with that, I will hush and let answer any questions, or we can go on to the next topic.
Does anyone have any other questions for Kristen?
Yeah, Kristen, this is Kevin with TWC. I had a couple of questions. The CTE updates and changes that you mentioned, did you say it was part of HB2? Was it included in that piece?
Yes, so House Bill 2 has Article 6, which is on CTE, but really the driving bill is House Bill 120. So that one that has the prevailing language over the House Bill 2 article. So I would look at House Bill 120. I would also look at HB 20, which is on kind of an applied sciences pathway. But HB 120 is kind of the larger sort of CTE extension.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so HB 120 and then HB 20. I could get more specifics on the updates and changes.
Yes.
Okay. The other question I had, and this may be something Amy's going to touch on, but has TEA looked at the impact of the school choice passage on students with disabilities?
Well, I mean, yes, from the perspective at this point, we're just trying to prepare for implementation of it, since the comptroller has till May of 26 to adopt rules, but obviously within the scope of SB2, and as I was saying, that students with disabilities are entitled to state funding that, sort of matches what they either were receiving in school if they were in public school, or that they would be entitled to if they hadn't been in public school. There will likely be, some increase in parent requests for evaluations. So I think that's the biggest thing that we're tackling initially is trying to, get together, guidance for districts on how to, manage not only that, potential increase in evaluations, but then what does it look like after an evaluation? If they choose to evaluate, what does it look like after an evaluation? What is this, IEP look like for purposes of the ESA, which is, different, potentially different for, if the student was going to go into public school. So that's our first, I think, thing we're sort of tackling in terms of implementation of SB2 for students with disabilities.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I think what's next on our agenda would be public comment. We should probably start with those in the room. Stephen and Maya, are you ready for us? As a reminder, no confidential or protected information should be shared and you are limited to 3 minutes.
Amy, I think if you don't mind turning off your microphone, and I'm going to turn mine on so that I can be clearly heard. Okay, well, good morning. I'm Stephen Ellerman with Disability Rights Texas. I'm in attendance, but on the Zoom meeting. I want to speak to a recent request for a contract by the Texas Education Agency concerning special education complaint investigations. I want to request that the CAC, on an agenda for a future meeting, put a review of how Texas Education Agency is conducting special education investigations and why TEA is seeking outside assistance with that process. The solicitation for a private contractor is available through the TEA website under procurement. The details are in the solicitation. It's called a request for proposal. But the bottom line is that it seems as if TEA is turning to an outside vendor to assist with special education investigations when students with disabilities request a federal, under federal law, that TEA investigate a specific dispute between a student and a school district. If there are significant issues happening in that program that require an outside vendor, I believe the CAC, as part of its oversight, should at least ask for a briefing about that topic. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Apologies for the echo. I'm also here in person. My name is Maya. I'm also with Disability Rights Texas. And I wanted to bring something up that's in HB2. There's an amendment on crisis prevention and intervention training in an effort to equip school staff to better handle crisis situations and hopefully reduce instances of restraint. In HB2, it writes that the commissioner will set guidelines on who is trained and how frequently they're trained. And so I would recommend that this body add to the agenda in the future, reviewing that so that when rulemaking comes around, you're prepared to provide guidance and recommendations. Apologies, this echo is messing with my brain. And then another thing that I wanted to flag for this body is language on threat assessment team membership when the student being assessed is a student with a disability. There's slightly different language in HB6 and HB 121. HB6 requires that the team include a member who is knowledgeable on disabilities and disability manifestations generally. And HB 121 says that that added member should have specific knowledge of the student being assessed and their disability and how it manifests. So I believe HB 121 would supersede HB6 since it's a bit more specific. But that's another thing that I would recommend this body put on the agenda in a future meeting. Thank you.
To discuss. Correct.
Yes, the crisis prevention and intervention training requirement, rulemaking and threat assessment team membership when the student being assessed has a disability.
Can I request that members of the committee or members of the public? Amy, you need to turn your camera back on. I did. Members of the committee or members of the public, if you have agenda item requests, particularly because we don't have our secretary in the meeting today, if you could go ahead and put those in the chat so that we can record them for the minutes, that would be helpful. Yeah. Since both of these public comments are about bills that have recently passed and legislative updates are in the agenda, it is possible for us to discuss what we heard in these public comments. Does anyone have any questions or discussion points that they would like to bring up before we move to our official update? Oh, and I forgot, we have one more public comment from online. Linda Litzinger, would you like to present to us?
Yes, please. Can you all hear me? Okay. Greetings, friends. I am Linda Litzinger, the Public Policy and Advocacy Director at Texas Parent to Parent, speaking on behalf of Texas Parent to Parent today. SB 57 passed. It instructs TEA to instruct the LEAs to create a multi-hazard operations plan for individualized students. It stopped short of placing the individualized plan in each IEP, and I can understand that there were teachers that were worried about needing to, of course, every emergency is different from the next one. And they were afraid that if they changed the plan on the fly, that they would be responsible for it. And so in the end, we didn't put the plan into each IEP. But it's still important to have that plan and know what device is being used for the students with mobility issues and practice with it, and know how many adults it takes for the transfer. For example, the new chairs, it takes one person to take them up or down the steps. They have a tractor tread on them and a battery. And so one person can drive it. But you've got to know which student can stand, pivot, and sit down in it, which ones need a two-person transfer at knees and chest, and which ones need a four-person transfer for each limb. And you've got to practice and you've got to know. And I'm saying that as because I know somebody who only had one practice in 13 years of public education in 5 schools. And so that takes me to the second half of my comment, and that is Schar's bill SB 1952 passed. It instructs that HHSC create a memorandum of understanding with TEA to train staff who work with students and evaluate their readiness. And this would be a good place while you're working with that child with mobility and getting them in or out of their wheelchair to also during the training do the emergency transfer device that the school has purchased for that child. And so I recommend that in that MOU and in that training, they actually cover the emergency device as well. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Do any members of the committee have any questions related to the new bills that passed for any of our public commenters today?
Thank you. Oh, I wanted to add, if I were a parent, I would also be asking the principal to see what that transfer looks like, just to put it on their radar. Thank you.
right, are you all ready to move to our legislative presentation? Or do we need a 5-minute break?
I'm
I'm
ready.
gonna
I'm
take,
ready to keep going. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna take that as being ready. Um, okay, so we're gonna start with bills that have already been signed by the governor. Some of these Kristen has covered for us already. Um, SB2, we have the Education Savings Account, otherwise known as vouchers, launching for the 26-27 school year. We also have HB 1188, also known as the Caitlin Henley Act. Schools must refer families to the local IDD authority for waiver waiting list info and eligibility determination. Education bills on the governor's desk, HB 2310. A strategic 4-year plan for the improvement and expansion of early learning and educational opportunities. And I'm going to share my screen because I forgot to do that. Okay. SB 568 ensures that funding moves from a setting-based model to a service intensity model, meaning instead of getting more funding for a more restrictive environment, it's based on what a student needs and not where they're placed. SB 57 requires TEA to create guidelines for LEAs to create individualized multi-hazard emergency operation plans to ensure individualized student and faculty safety, but they stopped short of placing it in each IEP, as we heard in our public comment. More on the governor's desk. SB 1952, HHSC has oversight of the school health and related services program. They must enter into an MOU with TEA to train staff and evaluate readiness. HB 6, school discipline management and access to telehealth mental health services in public schools. Okay, education bills that failed to pass. SB 2735 and HB 5271 relates to child fine requirements of students with cortical vision impairment. SB 154 and HB 1011 would have given pediatrics feeding screenings for dysphagia and helped ensure student safety with swallowing issues. HB 2292 is the school initiative initiated undocumented early pickups for out-of-school suspensions. This was filed by Representative Alma Allen. Jose Menendez filed SB 1447, which is Assistive Technology Standards in 504 or IEB programs. HB 2807 would have been our statewide IDD coordinating council, which would include a member from TEA. And that was filed by Representative Tony Rose. More bills that failed to pass. SB 159 would have been a training program for staff who transport students with IDD. SB 172 would be the employment of a special education liaison in ISDs. SB 198 or HB 1706 would have passed additional requirements for students with autism. SB 544 would have required IEP supplements for certain public school students placed in alternative special education settings. SB 1671 would have made IEP requirements placed in those alternative settings and monitoring for those settings. Those were both Menendez. There was an educational representative bill that failed to pass. That was HB 446, and also the STARS Advisory Council, which is HB 5262, also failed to pass. Does anyone have any questions before we talk about our next legislative report? Y'all are a quiet group today.
Indeed.
Kristen, is there anything I missed that you would like to fill in? We can't hear you.
Well, still can't hear me, huh? Maybe now.
Now you can.
I don't know.
Now we can.
Okay. The phone on my laptop doesn't like me today. The one, I think I would just fill in a couple of pieces from House Bill 2 on special education, and this is also, of course, in SB 568, there will be a requirement starting this school year for at least one board meeting per year that students receiving special education services will be discussed by the board. So the outcomes and the data of students receiving special education services. So at least one board meeting per year. There needs to be a discussion on student level data, and the agency has to adopt certain performance indicators as sort of the minimum standard of what needs to be discussed in these local school board meetings. And this is both for charter schools as well as school districts. So that I would say would be of interest. Also, the special education transportation mileage reimbursement was increased from $1.08 to $1.13. I would say probably the only other thing I would mention is that the state will now give kind of a cost offset for special education evaluations. So students who receive an initial evaluation for special education, as districts, since they report those obviously to us, given that that is a federal requirement for timely evaluations, they will receive $1,000 essentially as a kind of cost offset for those initial evaluations. So that is that's definitely something new. I will say that these SSES program, which is the Supplemental Special Education Services, which is now called the Parent Directed Special Education Services Program. That is the $1,500 grant for parents of students receiving special education services. The funding for that stayed at $30 million each year of the biennium. We received over 80,000 applications this year. Even just assuming 90% of those are eligible, we will have a pretty lengthy wait list going into this coming year. Starting September 1 with the 30 million, and we'll quickly deplete that and still have a waiting list. So just, letting you know that funding stayed at 30 million. I would probably be, I'll stop there. Lots still to unpack. So, next meeting, I'm sure we'll have a lot more meat to give you or to offer you on implementation of bills.
Kristen, this is Adrian Guerra. I have a question about the requirement to present at board meetings and the discussion. Will we be getting some guidance from TEA as to what needs to be presented? And
yes, so there is a requirement in that piece of the statute that will require us to adopt rules. So obviously that will be a somewhat of a length of time before we can do that. But in terms of, I think we plan on putting out just some general guidance before then, as far as, just letting districts know, hey, here's the statute. There's one specific piece that, of course, it talks about that the college, career, and military readiness outcomes bonus, that has to be one part of the discussion as far as how students receiving special education services, how many of those met the criteria for the outcomes bonus. Other than that, it requires the agency to adopt the kind of minimum performance indicators to discuss in that meeting. So until the final rule is set, obviously school districts can basically kind of choose the data that they want to present to the board. But I would imagine, Dr. Guerra, that we'll put out, just guidance as far as, this is to help you until those rules are adopted.
great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Anything else that stood out to people? Any ideas based on those bills of things that we might want to talk about in our next few meetings? Or our next section of the agenda is to talk about the report and which sections we might want to extend to the next report. But did anything particularly pop out to you guys as we were going over the bills before we start?
This is Kevin with TWC. Just one clarification on SB 2. So that will take effect school year 26-27. So rules will be developed around that this upcoming school year, I gather.
Administer this program, so I think they have until May of 26 to adopt rules. However, I do know they've already established a website. I'll see if I can find it. So they'll probably start adding, detail to that as they, start building out kind of their processes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that link, Kristen. In previous iterations of this report, we have gone through and checked which ones of our recommendations have gone through and which ones hasn't. Because so few bills at all went through the process, I decided it would be faster to go through each of our topics and sort of talk about what the legislature was interested in and talking about in those topics. And then we could talk about, as a group, whether we think there is still more to be done on that area of recommendation. And then we could use that discussion to decide whether we need to keep our same subcommittees or form new ones. And then out of that discussion, if we find that certain subcommittees need to put items on the agenda for presentation or data research needed, then we'll go from there today. Does that sound like a plan that everyone agrees with at the moment?
Yes.
Yes.
Work for me.
Okay, so let me pull our subcommittees back up. So, for the finance section of the report, they talked a lot about special education funding. We might lose some funding to some vouchers. Again, they changed to a service intensity model versus a setting-based model. So the implementation of that may need some recommendations. I had a suggestion that to the education savings accounts, we might want to recommend that we add parent-directed evening employees for students with a service intensity need. For example, there's not a way under the contracted employees for ESAs right now for a parent to, for example, hire a student's current or former paraprofessional to write for them to do their homework because they need a scribe for their homework, or to hire a behavioral therapist one-on-one to work with a student. And that's just something off the top of my head that I thought may need a recommendation. Does that make sense to everyone? Or does anyone have further questions, I guess is my... And then for how,
Can you hear me, Amy?
yes,
Sorry, it's Kristen again. I would want to check. I mean, I think that's fine to keep on your list. I do want to check in terms of allowable uses. It may just be a matter of clarifying or adding a particular use for the ESA. I do know that it essentially says in SB2 that whoever is a kind of an approved provider or vendor under PDSES can be added to this list over on SB2 as well. So yeah, that's something to consider in terms of, how it ends up being implemented and any changes you might recommend. Next session is, to make sure that it encompasses the opportunities that you're speaking about.
right. And then we need to talk about whether we still need a health and safety section. That would be a good place to put the new SHARS implementation and or training for parents regarding all of these new discipline protocols in HB6. As far as the staffing section of our report, there weren't any bills specifically related to staffing, but the piece of the STARS bill that calls for staff training and evaluations, a recommendation surrounding that could go in this subcommittee. We may also be able to put in a recommendation in there for what to do when students with vouchers suddenly leave or return, and it might affect our student-teacher ratios. For behavior section, again, the training for parents about the new discipline protocols could also go here. The digital literacy and accessibility, we could do a little bit about the personal technology issue here, or the bill that Senator Menendez proposed about assistive technology. Dyslexia didn't have anything come up this session, so we need to talk about whether dyslexia needs some recommendations or not. Justice, for HB6, we might need a recommendation about protecting a student's due process prior to assigning alternate placement, either temporary or indefinite, in in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, DAEP, or juvenile justice alternative placement. So, that being stated, do y'all think there are any subcommittees that we need to add or take out, given what we've said in the legislative update?
I'm good with keeping the committees as stated.
Okay. Does anyone want to switch to another subcommittee or add themselves on any particular committees? And I know that we are going to add some new people, I hope soon, because we have some people that have turned off the committee.
Amy, just to make sure I'm understanding what we're saying is the committees that we were on for the last legislative report,
Yeah.
we're saying, because just to your earlier
Yeah.
conversation about dyslexia, I would like to continue working on that. I think there is a lot of stuff still coming up, especially with the new update and whatnot from 2024. So just want to make sure.
Yeah. So we're having this discussion. What's on the table is that we're keeping the subcommittees we have. So I don't think we need a motion for that. And also we're having a discussion about if we keep the subcommittees we have, does anybody want to move around within those subcommittees? Do we need a motion for that, Laura, do you think? To have the subcommittees remain as they are?
So, and that could be something you decide to do, unless we can try to double check your bylaws, and if so, we can set it and have a motion next time. But I think that's fine, and it may end up being, once you get into it and start development, that someone might want to switch.
Yeah. I think we would need a motion if we were changing anything, but since we're not, I don't think we do.
Amy, this is Kevin. I was just curious if there was any feedback that you may have received from this most recent report that was submitted
From legislative staff,
Yes.
no.
Yeah.
But I did receive some feedback that other advocates thought it was well received. Yes, the one piece of feedback I did receive on the report legislatively was that it was very thorough, but not on specific pieces of our report. I know that many other advocates used our report in making their one-pagers for bills. So
Right.
it was helpful for people.
Good deal. Thank
If
you.
that answers any part of your question.
Yes. Thank you.
So, as you think about your subcommittees, are there any pieces of data or presentations that you would like us to request from TEA or any other data source for next time, so you can start developing recommendations?
I would just like to see if if we have updated numbers for this dyslexia identification once it went underneath special education, if it was subcategorized, to see if that changed identification numbers with the new with that new law. So just some new numbers on dyslexia identification.
Kristen, do you have a way to get us that data, or do you need to hunt for it longer than next time?
Can you hear me?
No, yes,
We can hear
barely.
you. Next time. And also, because of changes to these early literacy assessments, you know, that will have an impact to dyslexia screeners, and you know, so we can talk about that too.
And also, I think we need to put on the agenda another legislative update so we can see what actually passed as well, versus what was vetoed.
Kristen, do we ever ask districts to tell us which programs they're using throughout the state for dyslexia remediation?
That is not a direct data collection requirement, and so it somewhat depends on if they are going through monitoring, you know, through special education monitoring, and dyslexia monitoring. They essentially have to show us that their program meets the requirements. So it's not necessarily a name that's required, but nowadays it's kind of hard. You can't really separate the two, right? So, so it's not directly required, but it does, what is required, of course, is for the program to meet the requirements of the handbook, which
Mhm.
ultimately kind of ends up being one and the same.
Right.
But we don't keep, because of that no direct sort of requirement to collect it, we don't necessarily keep a list of this district uses this district uses this. There was a piece in HB2 that would allow the agency to develop like a recommended
Right.
evidence-based dyslexia program list.
Mhm.
I imagine if we were to do that, it would be several years down the road just because of everything else capacity-wise. I don't think we could get to that.
Okay, so
We do
that
have
list.
we do have a resource list that's out there that we basically kind of solicited interest of, hey, if you think your program meets the requirements, so we did develop kind of a resource list for districts that said, hey, these programs, based on what they submitted, have kind of the minimum, we see this as the minimum requirements of compliance. So it's definitely not like a recommended list, or like a full vetting. So we have authority to now do that, but I think that would just, take some time to figure out if that's something that would be beneficial or if it's more about, I would be more apt to making sure that the LEAs, the districts have the resources to purchase the programs,
Mhm.
I don't know. So
Mhm.
yeah, could be a
Yeah.
long conversation, but
Yeah, just looking at the just knowing how these students are progressing through the programs that the LEAs have chosen or allowed in their districts, I feel like that's going to be highlighted through the ESAs and how that begins to affect the districts. So just thinking that we should be really monitoring that at the TEA level because I do think that that's going to be a very large reality of the use of ESAs.
okay. Yeah, that would be good, a good data point to try to find out.
Thank you.
So yes, I think Amy, to the point, I think I can be prepared for your next meeting to just try to have, I mean, I'll present as much up to date data on students with disabilities and including dyslexia as I can just so you have it for any of your subcommittees. And so if there's anything in particular that you would want in relation to, I imagine you would probably want 504 data, as well as if there's anything we can glean from 504 transition, it's hard to make a direct correlation, but 504 impacts, associated with dyslexia to special education, as well as, special education identification and by disability category. And then probably number of evaluations completed. So I'll get you, the kind of essential sort of demographic information that your subcommittees can make sure they have.
Some of you have been very quiet today. April, Claudia, anything?
No, I was taking a lot of notes because as y'all are talking through several of those things, there's so many implications that we're kind of waiting. As Kristen knows, we're waiting to see how they, one, if they get signs, and then also just several things that start right away, but yet we won't probably have guidance from TEA on for a little while. I know a hot question for us at SpedTex and different groups has been the two things: the allotment for the FIEs and how that's going to play out, but then a lot of stress around the amount of the caseload around evaluating students who are potentially going to use the vouchers to go to private schools. And if the districts are going to be able to handle that load of those requests. And if TEA is going to give some guidance on how to handle that. So I would say that's the top two. The other area that, and this was really important to this group before, but really understanding the implications of the restraint guidelines. And then I personally have some concerns, is probably not the best word, but just some understanding around, there was a lot of changes in the discipline bill around what's going to be allowed. And it's kind of really freed up some administrator options for discipline, like removal to virtual DAP, to basically not limit that in-school suspension to 3 days anymore. That's open back up. So the implications for special ed students is one that I've been, and I already have a lot of superintendents calling, asking like, how do we need to adjust our processes and things like that. And of course, y'all brought it up, but the cell phones, and if there's, how we're going to adjust for the cell phones and the devices that are needed for our students who need them for accommodations and things like that. So just a lot of thinking for me today, because I don't think there's a lot of, I don't think we know for sure how to move on some of this action right now.
Yeah, the out of school suspensions bring up a lot of questions for me too.
And the virtual DAEP is going to be really interesting. I know just internally that's a lot of, that came from a lot of special ed students not being able to be removed due to different reasons or some, and I think that there'll be an attempt to use virtual DAP as a placement for special ed students. And so just thinking through how our special ed teams support the kids in these placements, that'll be some things that we'll need to work through.
Yeah, questions. We need updates on a lot of those. And potentially a lot of public comments from people about how it's going on the ground. So if any of y'all know some parents or some students that could give us some real life examples of how this would affect them or is affecting them, tell them to come talk to us.
Hey, Amy, this is Lori. I've got the phone thing, just to touch on that for a moment. My daughter has epilepsy, and that was huge for her at school because she had a sensor on her phone that would automatically call me if she had a seizure. So if she would not have been able to have her phone, it could have been catastrophic because someone's not with her all the time.
Right. I actually have several sensors on me right now that are connected to my phone that I didn't have in high school, that looking back at it, I probably should have. But I did have permission to have my phone on me at all times in case I got stuck in an elevator or behind a door. So yeah.
And I can't imagine, right, Kristen, you might be no more than me, but I can't imagine that there won't be exceptions based off of IEPs. And
it's in the bill that requires those, those kinds of exceptions. But I think
how does that get implemented in a culture where then you have to explain to all the rest of the kids.
That's exactly it.
why
Yeah.
does so-and-so get to keep their phone and keep their right to privacy? Because then you have to out somebody's medical diagnosis to still let them have their phone.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
complicated. So, more remains to be seen. Is there anything that we need to add to our list of future agenda items that is not in our chat yet? Oh, student discipline.
Did a few in the chat that I think we at least some, discussion points and some policy questions for you all to weigh in at the next meeting on discipline, funding,
Yeah.
crisis prevention that we've talked about, and the safety during school drills. And then, yes, Laura added, and then probably a discussion of your bylaws, if not at the next meeting, maybe the following. This just depend. And then, another legislative update, which can be part of my comments if you'd like, Amy.
Yes, please. Oh, Erin has a question about bylaws for you, Kristen.
It's more refreshing content, just because, it has been quite a few years. So I just want to make sure that the current committee is, content with what's on there. So nothing in particular.
Do we have any updates from the governor's office about when we should be expecting new committee members?
I do not at this time, but that is definitely with the changes to the statute for that section too. That was on our to-do list to touch base with them.
Okay. And we do not have another committee meeting scheduled at this time, do we?
I do not believe so.
I don't believe so. But we'd be looking at October?
Probably.
Does October 15th work? It's a Wednesday?
Maybe we'll have to pull the members. Since Janie isn't here, which member would like to put their notes in our minutes format?
Amy, in the past, when I served as secretary and I was absent, I was sent a recording of the meeting. And then I formed my notes from that recording and any notes that the team shared with me. So perhaps that could be an option for today's meeting.
I think that might be our best option. Laura, do you have a way to send that to Janie?
Yes. I will do that.
So we are looking at October 15th or the week of October 15th as an option. Does anyone want to look at their calendars real fast? so that we can officially propose that as a date. So I will move that we propose October 15th as a date. Can I have a second?
Kevin, I'll second it.
Does anybody else have their calendars out? Does that not work for anybody? And Laura, have you already checked with Region 13 that the room will be available?
I have not, but I will confirm with them today.
Okay. All those in favor of setting our next meeting date is October 15th, 2025. Say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Did I hear an opposed? All saying aye. We will set our next meeting date for October 15th. And I appreciate y'all working hard to have a quorum for today. And I hope that continues, because we've got a lot of work to do in this very big state of ours. And hopefully we will approve our minutes when we see each other in October. And let me know in your subcommittees if there's anything else that you want to add to our agenda, or if there's any information that you need either from Laura, from TEA, or from me. And with that, I would like to say have a great week, and we will see you on the 15th.
Thank
I
you.
will
Thank
officially adjourn.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.